There are good reasons for dating the emergence of a frog-like spirit out of the mouth of the Roman Church beast from 1958. In that year the long period of Pope Pius XII's influence in Rome ceased, and the cardinals elected Angelo Roncalli, a man of totally different outlook. The man-centered, political, and unscrupulous nature of the papacy was plainly demonstrated when the new incumbent consigned a century's worth of papal decrees to the dustbin of history and altered course to the left. Irrespective of previous Catholic anti-communist principles, he considered Soviet Russia, communism, and socialism were too powerful not to be accommodated by a church dedicated to its own survival. Roman compromise would yet again be called on to incorporate successful political movements within the church's embrace, to acquire tempting payoffs in concessions and prestige. The renegade nature of Roncalli's crusade was signaled by his choice of name, John XXIII, the title of the anti-pope who usurped the papal throne in 1410 to 15 AD, and, therefore, a title that had been in disrepute for over 500 years. His inclination towards modernistic views had been recognized early in his career, resulting in his posting as apostolic visitor to Bulgaria in 1925. There, and later in Istanbul, in hierarchical exile, he was an ecclesiastical diplomat in surroundings where Roman Catholics were in the minority. His long experience in these home grounds of the Eastern Church, under the shadow of communism, further developed his tolerant servivalist policies. Roncalli's talents were employed by Pope Pius XII after the war, in the capacity of nuncio to France, to reconcile the Gaul and the Catholic clergy who had cooperated with the Nazi-supporting Vichy government, a mission in which he was eminently successful. But Roncalli went further and fostered cordial relations with the Soviet embassy and French socialists. When elected in 1958, after a 6-year term as Patriarch of Venice, he was much more than just a caretaker pope. Roncalli packed his 4.5-year reign with a host of reforms. Pronouncements against communism ceased. In 1959, at the Basilica of St. Paul, he stunned his audience with the announcement of an ecumenical council, which would become known as the Second Vatican Council, or simply Vatican II, its same being. The promotion of Christian unity, especially with Christians in the East, as one of its objects. When the 3-year council began in 1962, the Kremlin cooperated by allowing the attendance of Russian clergy. By the time the council ended, nearly 100 observers from other churches were also present. Roncalli met the Archbishop of Canterbury, the first such meeting with a pope since the Reformation, and the presiding bishop of the Protestant Episcopal Church of the United States. Relations with the Patriarch of Constantinople improved. He made, as I have mentioned, a singular, and, on Rome's part, uncharacteristic confession of church responsibility for the persecution of the Jews. Not long before his death, he issued his famous encyclical Pacem in Terris, meaning peace on earth, which was seen as a quantum step towards reconciliation of the church with people of all persuasions. Ecumenism for the whole world, as well as within the church, was the undoubted implication. The croaking of the democratic amphibian was at last being heard emanating from the Vatican. The world was impressed. Giovanni Montini, who, as Pope Paul VI, succeeded to the position of mouth of the beast, continued where John XXIII left off. He had previously spoken enthusiastically of the Ecumenical Council. The council will make Rome the spiritual capital of the world, for whence the light will spread upon those places and institutions where men are working for the union of the peoples, for social peace, for the welfare of the poor, for progress, for justice, and for liberty. It will be the greatest council the church has ever held in the whole of the 20 centuries of its history. Even as to numbers, it will be the greatest spiritual assembly of its hierarchy, in the utmost peace and unity. It will be the greatest council in the Catholicity of its extent, which truly covers the whole of the civil world, and the whole of our planet. Before our very eyes, history is opening up enormous prospects for centuries to come. The dark superstitions of Rome's pago-Christian heritage in both doctrine and ritual could never generate in man the love of God and his fellows. To promote genuine unity, Rome has always appealed to blind superstitious instincts and captured men by deceit. It is an eloquent testimony to 20th century man's continued state of deception that he has, on the whole, restored respect to a patently lying and political system that passes itself off as the world's supreme moral authority. Indeed, the new look, almost democratic church gives the impression that the old-style papal evils are buried and forgotten. Being ignorant of the scriptures, today's masses are unaware of the disastrous end to which the insane frog-like spirit of the Roman beast, in concert with those of the Russian East and European West, is leading them. The Ecumenical Council, that ended in 1965, modernized the church in its appearance. Liberty for considerable diversity in religious practice ensured. But the fact that there was an ecumenical council at all was more important than the final decisions and policies themselves. And the democratic spirit of the council was reflected in a series of initiatives towards other religions, not only Christian, which, seen in the light of history, was truly remarkable. Those acquainted with Bible prophecy, however, were not surprised. If John 23 had opened the Vatican windows to the world, Paul VI opened the door. He became an international traveler and diplomat. In January 1964 he made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land where, by deliberate prearrangement, he met Athenagoras, Patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church of Constantinople. The two chiefs of Catholicism met in the city of Jerusalem, from which their ancient Roman ancestors had determined to exclude the Jews forever. When, 3.5 years later, the Jews gained control of Jerusalem, the God of Israel served notice that his designs, not Rome's, would ultimately prevail. As time went on, contracts between Rome and Constantinople increased. At the end of the Vatican's Second Council, both churches solemnly withdrew the anathemas and bulls of excommunication that they had hurled at one another centuries before. In July 1967 the Pope, to Athenagoras' surprise, called on him in Istanbul. Conscious of the honor accorded him, Athenagoras responded most significantly. He acknowledged the Bishop of Rome as first in honor amongst us. In October of that year Constantinople's Patriarch reciprocated with a visit to Rome, the first such visit for over 500 years. The two ecclesiastics, with the Pope in the lead, were building a bridge between West and East. Contacts with other churches also increased. Secretariats for non-Christians and another for non-believers were set up, also a body to study relationships with Lutherans. In 1966 in Rome, Paul VI embraced Ramsay, the Archbishop of Canterbury. An Anglican Roman International Commission was established. Meetings of reconciliation took place between the Pope and the Eastern Coptic churches of Antioch and Alexandria. Representatives of the Armenian Church were received. The mouth of the beast was ensuring that in the reunion of the churches, all roads of reconciliation would lead to Rome. As to the religions that Rome had once called pagan, the church made sure it could find some common ground. The Vatican's Second Declaration on Missionary Activity referred to seeds of the word which lie hidden in national and religious traditions. From this has grown the interfaith dialogue and movement of seeing every religion as a path to God. But in essence, the Vatican wants every religion to be a path to Rome. Pope Paul VI went far afield with his ecumenical spirit. He addressed the United Nations General Assembly in New York in 1965 and the International Labour Organization in Geneva in 1969. In 1970 he carried his crusade to the Far East and Australia. His encyclical Popularum Progressio of March 26, 1967, made an appeal for worldwide social justice for all, but especially for third world countries, and that the economy of the world should serve mankind, and not just the few. But the definition of the church's attitude to the Jews ran into difficulties. John 23's frank confession of guilt was not shared by the church as a whole, and the declaration on the Jews presented to Vatican II caused considerable controversy. A revised document that, nevertheless, explicitly condemned anti-Semitism was passed, with opposition still coming from some delegates, including those from Middle Eastern and Arab countries opposed to Israel. The reigns of Popes John and Paul in the 20 years from 1958 to 1978 saw a realignment of the Church, whose lion mouth in the Vatican in Rome now echoed the liberty, equality, and fraternity of her enemies of 170 years before. Her ecumenism with its unprincipled amphibiousness, compasses sea and land, working political signs, and influencing the kings of the whole world, to gather them together, unto the war of the great day of God, the Almighty. with reconciliation proceeding between Western Roman and Eastern Greek Orthodox peoples, and rapprochement progressing with the Kremlin, the church held the vital key to re-establishment of a Pago-Christian Roman Empire, extending this time from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The election of Albino Luciani to the papal throne on the 26th of August 1978 produced a bombshell. 33 days later, in highly suspicious circumstances, he died. In relatively good health, he was said to have succumbed to a heart attack, but no death certificate was issued, no autopsy permitted. Embalming was carried out in an unusual way, and with extraordinary haste. In selecting the composite name John Paul I, Luciani had served notice that he intended to continue in the policies of the modernist popes, but he intended to do so as an outsider to the Vatican system, with the clear desire to clean up, amongst other things, the financial malpractice with which the Vatican Bank was involved, and of which he had been aware for some time, but which had become glaringly obvious to him, now that he was in control. His death gave breathing space to those who were engaged in a range of huge international financial dealings that were totally illegal, being movement of currency across borders without approval, fraudulent share dealings, laundering of mob money and so on. The Vatican Bank, run by Bishop Paul Marcinkus, worked hand in hand with the Banco Ambrosiano chain, which eventually collapsed 4 years later, after being milked of millions by its chairman on behalf of a group of powerful criminally oriented businessmen. As judicial investigations took place in 1979, a whole series of murders and apparent suicides occurred in Italy and elsewhere, all of which had a deterrent effect on the course of justice. By 1982, Marcinkus had made himself a prisoner in the Vatican to avoid arrest by the Italian police, eventually resigning from his office in the Vatican in 1990 and returning to the USA, dying on February 20, 2006, never being convicted of any crime. Eventually the Vatican Bank was forced to accept responsibility for part of the missing funds, making partial restitution to victims of fraud, without, of course, acknowledging any legal liability. Even now in 2021, the Vatican Bank is still being plagued with legal problems. The next president of the bank from 1989 till 2009 was Angelo Calloria, who has just been sentenced to almost 9 years prison for money laundering and aggravated embezzlement. In September 2020, Giovanni Angelo Becciu, one of the Vatican's powerful cardinals, resigned from his post amid financial scandal. With the 1978 election of Karol Wojtyla as Pope John Paul II, signaled that the time had arrived for yet further notable modifications of the directions being taken by the church hierarchy in adapting to circumstances. He was, at 58 years, relatively young for a pope. He was an intellectual, yet with a working class background and connections, though he was an insider to the church establishment, and he came from behind the Iron Curtain. He was Polish. Clearly the cardinal had a reason for appointing the first non-Italian pope in well over 400 years, and a man from the Slavic East with first-hand experience of totalitarian communism at that. They found it necessary to break with tradition, to obtain in their leader the qualities and experience best suited to the survival and progress of the Roman Catholic Church on the world scene, and particularly in the newly emerging Euro-Asian political landscape. Poland's position in East-Western church-state relations was unique. To begin with, its geographical location in Central Europe guarantees it a significant role in the forthcoming Euro-Russian Confederation. It is interesting to note that the Poles believe that a stone in Warsaw Park marks the exact center of Europe. More importantly, it is the most fiercely Roman Catholic country on earth. Practically all children are christened, around 92 to 95% become practicing Catholics, and Sunday Mass attendance is high at over 36%. Thus, though ego-politically situated in Eastern Rome, Poland is religiously bound to Western Rome. As such, it constitutes a powerful lever by which the papacy can bring pressure to bear on Russia. In deliberately selecting the name John Paul II, Karol Wojtyla conveyed the impression that the ecumenical policies of his three predecessors would be continued, but of course, in his own way. Although Pope Paul VI had traveled extensively in promoting a Roman solution to ecclesiastical and international problems, John Paul II completely surpassed him in this respect, making a total of 104 pastoral trips outside Italy, in all. He visited 129 countries, completing tarmac-kissing pilgrimages to every continent except Antarctica. Despite the violent, intolerant, and oppressive record of the Church, the Pope has everywhere lectured on human rights, peace, love, non-violence and unity, leading many to assume that the leopard has changed his spots. But, as we shall see, Rome's changes are cosmetic, in accordance with the divine axiom that a tree that is corrupt cannot bring forth good fruit. John Paul II tempered ecumenism within the Church with a restatement of papal primacy and infallibility. However, the infallibility is shared by the episcopacy when the body acts together with its head in regular synods. John Paul II himself stamped on trends to modernize the Church theologically and morally. All the old pago-Christian tenets of Mariolatry, worship of saints, reverence for holy places, fables of immortal soulism, hell, purgatory, transubstantiation, the Trinity, the anti-God devil, priestly celibacy, and so on, have been re-endorsed and made inviolable. The positions of the Church on marriage, divorce, and abortion have also, much to the annoyance of many of its followers, been unequivocally restated. Church pronouncements on these last might appear at first to be good fruits on a corrupt tree, until the motives for their application are discerned. The fact of the matter is that the Church in general, and the popes in particular, realize that the foundations of the imperial Church depend upon the integrity of the family unit, with its almost inevitable propagation of Catholicism. Ecclesiastical politics suggest that there is less risk of disintegration in maintaining the traditional stand than in conceding outright to the trends towards licentiousness and murder of the unborn. The total disregard for Bible teachings on so many other matters negates the argument that the Church's position is based on respect for God's word. Upon the death of Pope John Paul II, a German, Joseph Ratzinger, became Pope Benedict XVI, who after almost 8 years as Pope resigned his position, the first to renounce the papacy since Pope Celestine V in 1294 AD. He was remembered for reintroducing the traditional Latin Mass and promoting the use of traditional Latin in Catholic churches. He also established the Anglican Ordinariate in true ecumenism, helping pave the way for Protestants to re-enter the Catholic Church. Following his resignation as Pope, George Bergoglio, currently sitting as Pope Francis, has become the first non-European Pope since Gregory III in 741 AD. Interestingly, he is also the first ever Jesuit Pope, and viewers who have watched my video about the foundation of the Society of Jesus, or have an understanding of the workings of the Jesuit order, will see the significance of this Pope being from this counter-Reformation and militant society. It is also becoming apparent that the Vatican is supportive and active with the current Great Reset initiative from the World Economic Forum. The following was just published on the World Economic Forum website. Pope Francis criticizes the dogma of neoliberal faith in his encyclical, adding that the fragility of world systems, in the face of the pandemic, has demonstrated that not everything can be resolved by market freedom. He advocates for a political life not subject to the dictates of finance, and for making human dignity the focus of new, alternative social structures. It may sound nice on the surface, though I would encourage you, if you have not done so already, to look into the Great Reset as published directly by the World Economic Forum for yourself, as it is fitting into everything that I have been discussing on this channel for the last year. Rome's amphibian enterprise must eventually succeed in erecting the enormously powerful yet fragile colossus of Euro-Asian Confederation, the latter-day Roman Empire symbolized by the image in Daniel chapter 2. In this, Rome's policy will not be alone for, as we have seen, similar unclean spirits, spawned by the spirit of French democracy, emanating from the dragon, the Moscow Constantinopolitan Axis, and the false prophet, being Catholic Europe, will also play a part. Doubtless those intoxicated with Rome's doctrines will view the towering monolith with awe and pride, anticipating the uninhibited enjoyment of the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, that would be the envy of the ancient pagan emperors. Indeed, the highly ramified network of Catholic influence, which is increasing today in the Third World, particularly in Central and South America and Africa, will appear to be a unifying factor that could make universal peace, on man's terms, at last attainable. But a focus of resistance to Rome's aspirations, and the cause of her final downfall, will be found in Israel and the Jews. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to get notifications of new videos. Like, share and comment below.